is not the actions of a Premier or a government who have the cost of living crisis as their number one priority. And so this morning, I feel for everyday West Australians. I feel for young West Australians. I feel for families. I feel for the seniors in our community. I feel for small business who are struggling to make ends meet, who are struggling with a great range of financial impediments imposed upon them at the moment, who wake up and learn that their power bills will be rising by $500. And all of this happens on the same day when we hear another report, a new report, the A Long Way From Home report, a report which confirms that the housing crisis that we are currently experiencing in Western Australia is off the charts. It was described by Professor Duncan as a housing crisis, the one that we are experiencing in Western Australia, a housing crisis for the record books. This government has failed on cost of living. This government has failed on housing, and this government is clearly failing when it comes to managing energy prices for everyday West Australians. I'll allow Dr. Steve Thomas to come forward.
The first job of the government is to provide the amount of electricity that's needed at a price that business and families can meet. That's not happening at the moment. I travel across the entire state. Business is struggling and families will struggle because they've got used to having electricity credits and it doesn't look like they'll get one this year.
Should they continue?
Well, two things should happen. The most important thing is the government's job is to drive down electricity prices, but the transition plan they have in place is actually going to drive prices up. Western Australian families need to get used to massive increases in power prices, the sort of increases that business have absorbed over the last couple of years. In the contestable market, where you get a contract with Synergy, those prices for business have gone up between 25 and 45%. So from one contract to the next, that's a massive increase in price. The reality is that business has one of two options. It can absorb that price and reduce its output, or it can pass that price on to consumers. So if families think that they're missing out, which a better line would be, if the government thinks it's protecting families by simply putting prices up for businesses, families are paying that price anyway. Businesses have to increase their prices or they start going out of business. This is a transition that cannot work under the current models. The first job of government is to provide the energy the community needs, both families and business, and provide it at a price that they can afford. And in that, this government is failing.
Do you think without an election looming next year, we're not going to see as many targeted cost of living elements to the budget next week?
Oh, I don't think you will see as many targeted cost of living I don't think you will see a lot of targeted cost of living expenditure in the budget next week. The government's won an election, and so it's going to put those things off until it wants to buy the next election. In the meantime, energy prices will skyrocket and the energy system will be on the brink of collapse.
You had a go at answering my question before, but you didn't actually answer.
Okay.
It. Do you think the rebate should continue for households?
If the government is earning $6 to $12 billion in surpluses, it should be continuing to support people. And I've always welcomed the rebates as they've come through as an opportunity for the government to support struggling Western Australians. If they're going to have a massive budget surplus, absolutely, rebates are one of the best ways that they could underpin the community. Of course, it would be far better if they reduced the price of and the cost of electricity.
Should they be even more targeted and don't give them to the rich people who don't need them, which means they can still save a bit of money, or then just direct that money saved into more assistance for people with their cost of living?
So I've always said that these things should be better targeted and targeted to those people that need it most. I've said that for a number of years now, and I keep that position. But there's a surprising number of people who are struggling, the working poor of Western Australia, whose wages haven't kept up. They haven't kept up with the increases in power prices, and that group of people needs to be included. You can't restrict this just to a point where it's the very low income. There are people with a job who are sleeping in cars at the moment because they can't afford houses.
If this help is going to stop, do you think that they should just come clean a week early? Today the Deputy Premier kept pointing that the budget's next week. She's not going to talk to hypotheticals, but do you think West Australians could do with a week to prepare themselves?
I would love the government to come clean, but I'd love them to come clean on a lot of things beyond this. I mean, how are they going to manage the energy crisis they're creating? I'd love them to come clean on that. Where are they spending their money, for example, in a whole range of areas? How are they going to spend their transition money? What is the breakdown in the relationship between the Office of Energy in Western Australia and the market operator AEMO? There's a lot of things I'd like the government to come clean on. This is not a government that comes clean easily, though. This is a government of secrecy and opaqueness.
Well, I think what we can see here is that the sugar hits of energy credits ultimately in the long run don't work, because at the first opportunity post the election we're seeing those energy credits taken away. What we would rather see is sensible financial management. And again, I'm going to say $220 million is about to be spent on a racetrack that nobody wants, yet everyday West Australians are struggling with the price of energy. They will be struggling to keep the lights on at their home. What we would rather see is sensible, non-reckless financial management by this government. And that means keeping things even and at a level that West Australians can manage now and into the future.
Why do you think they play this game where they come out in recent weeks and say we promised these millions for this road and these millions for schools, and we're announcing it or re-announcing it, and yet they won't be honest about what they plan to do with important things like electricity credits?
Well, it's totally disingenuous. And as Steve has just said, this is a government that struggles to tell the truth to the people of Western Australia. They struggle with that absolute fundamental. Fundamentals across the board are failing, and yet they have a commitment and a preoccupation with projects that are not required by the people of WA. They've paid way too much money for a rugby team to come to WA, and they are prioritising $220 million for a racetrack, and yet at exactly the same time, everyday West Australians' power bills are about to go up by $500. Is that the sort of commitment that this state government made to the people of Western Australia before the election? No, it is not. And that's why I say the people of WA have every reason to be very disappointed by the Premier, by the Treasurer and by his government, because ultimately he is letting them down. This is a cop-out, and this is not what was promised going into the election. I'll say it again. He promised that cost of living would be his government's #1 priority, and yet at the first budget after the election, power bills are going to go up by $500 for every West Australian.
But this shows that at the end of the day, it's just really hard to take back any benefits. And on the other hand, because sugar hits like this can't last forever.
Well, that's the fundamental problem, I think, with sugar hits. And that's why I say ultimately sugar hits do not work. What does work is sensible, prudent financial management. What does work is not spending money on projects that are not required, there is no demand for and no transparency around. And I'll ask again, people understand this. $220 million for a racetrack at Burswood Park, or energy prices kept low or frozen. What would most West Australians prefer? And I'll tell you right now, they would prefer no racetrack at Burswood Park and energy prices kept low. That's what they want.
The Minister today said there was a lot of misinformation out there about the project and that it's not a permanent motorplex.
Which minister was that?
Sorry, Deputy Premier.
Right.
That it's not a permanent motorplex.
Have you seen the pictures?
I want your reaction to that.
Well, have you seen... Again, this is a government that's trying to treat the public of Western Australia, at best disingenuously, at worst like mugs. Have a look at the pictures. You tell me what it looks like. It is a racetrack, 3 kilometres long, through an area that is now parkland. You can call it what you like, but I know what a motorplex looks like. It looks like a 3 kilometre racetrack with permanent infrastructure for grandstands and for the pits. And so whatever the Deputy Premier wants to call it is her business. The public of Western Australia know exactly what it is. It's a project that they didn't want. It is a racetrack through Burswood Park, and it is going to cost $220 million at a time when power bills are going up by $500. This is not what this government, this Premier or this Treasurer promised the people of Western Australia.
Someone else about housing.
No, can I ask about it?
Just your reaction to that housing report that's come out.
Yeah.
Specifically quickly, is the government doing enough to address concerns regarding rent and housing availability in Perth at the moment?
So 7,700 rental properties short is what Western Australia and the Perth metropolitan area finds itself at the moment. There is a chronic housing shortage. It doesn't matter how you dress it up or which way you look at it, we do not have enough homes. We do not have enough social homes, and we have massive problems in availability and affordability of rental properties. It is absolutely clear, and the government like to toss around time frames in previous governments. This government are now into their 9th year. The problems that we have with housing in Western Australia are at the feet of this government and this government alone. They have chronically underplanned and underinvested in social, affordable and construction of housing in Western Australia, and the entire state is paying the price. As you will know, I was in the Pilbara last week. Chronic housing shortages in Karratha, in Port Hedland, in Exmouth, and throughout the metropolitan area, chronic housing shortages. And the worst part about this is it hits the most vulnerable in our community. Just as the $500 increase in power bills hit our most vulnerable, at the same time that those people are struggling to be able to pay their power bills, they are struggling with the affordability of their rent. And quite frankly, the great Australian dream of owning your own home now is out of reach for more West Australians than ever before. And that is fair and square with the government of Western Australia.
Does the opposition have a social housing target? You didn't have one leading up to the election and during the election campaign, so...
We're not in government. We are not in government. Our job is to continue to highlight the deficiencies of the government of Western Australia. And their job is to build the houses, to bring affordability into the range of everyday West Australians, and to be able to provide enough social and affordable housing so that people are not sleeping in their cars or on the streets. That's their job. They are the government.
Is that what people want? Is that what people want from the opposition, though? Surely you have an idea of what the government needs to do to change.
At the appropriate times, and I think you all understand, at the appropriate times, we will have very detailed policy laid out for the people of Western Australia to consider in the run-up to the 2029 election. We just had an election. It was this government that put their platform forward and were re-elected. It is our job to hold them accountable, and it is our job to remind people of their failings. And as you know, the Premier said his number one priority was cost of living, and he's putting power bills up by $500.
I guess how can you criticise their social housing policy if you didn't offer something leading up to the election?
Well, as you know, the last election from a Liberal Party point of view is not something that I was responsible for. I was a candidate in that election, and policy decisions were made by a team that now is part of the broader team. But all of our policy that was taken to the last election is, as is appropriate, up for consideration and up for discussion. I understand why you might push for what is your position on this, but it would be irresponsible of me as the new leader to give you policy positions that have not been worked out thoroughly in consultation with the team after broad discussions with the community. At the appropriate time, we will of course be doing that.
Shouldn't you take accountability for the last period and lead up to the election as leader? Or wouldn't you stand by what your party promised and didn't promise?
So what happens with an election, and certainly what happens with the opposition, is there was an election, the policy positions that were taken forward are all up for discussion and consideration. And so it would be irresponsible of me to be offering policy positions today, only 3 months after the last election.
Have you sat before the inquiry, the election inquiry, for the internal Liberal Party one, and given your thoughts on what went wrong?
Not as yet, no, I haven't.
Are you intending to?
Yes, I am.
What's some of the advice, or what's some of your observations that you made during the campaign of things that went wrong?
I've been pretty clear on this. There can be no dispute that we have not resonated sufficiently with younger voters. We have not resonated sufficiently with women in the community. We also, in some instances, have not used all of the appropriate and modern tools of electioneering to our best advantage. And one of our focuses will be our communications, our strategy around candidate selection, also policy development and the processes that go into that. Like with any significant milestone for any organisation, it is appropriate that how the organisation conducted itself during that period, it is appropriate that that is reviewed. We're doing what a well-formed and well-functioning organisation would do, and that is review our performance. And that really does mean across the board. But people have heard me say before, it is clear to me that our messaging was not as good as it could have been. We didn't speak to enough younger people, and we didn't speak to enough female voters in the community, and that is something that we need to assess.
There's reports out of Canberra today that a federal opposition leader is considering a much deeper inquiry, not just into the election, but what is wrong with the Liberal Party internally in a whole range of different states, as well as underperforming state divisions like WA. Would you support a much wider inquiry rather than just what went wrong at the federal election?
Well, clearly you learn by looking at what went wrong, what went right, what you could have done better. And if that's what Susan Lee is taking forward, then that is one, it's entirely her prerogative to do so. But I welcome any opportunity for reflection, for assessment, for an understanding of the structures and how they are working for us and how they are working against us. And if that is her proposal and we are invited to have feedback in that, that's not something that any of the WA Liberal Party team would have a problem contributing to, or conversations that we would have an issue being a part of.
This feels like it's less of an X-ray and more of a deep colonoscopy. Do you think the Liberal Party needs that to look at the brand, look at what's actually going on inside the party, rather than just we didn't speak to the right voters at one election?
Yeah, I think a couple of things I'd say. Firstly, I'd say it feels as though the federal Liberal Party are an election cycle behind the state Liberal Party. But I welcome that. Deep review, deep consideration, deep examination. They are the sorts of things that professional outfits do when they are assessed and the assessment comes up short. And I think that's very sensible if that's what the federal leader is proposing.